Hey everyone, this isn't just a ghost story. It's based on a chilling report from a night shift doctor. Picture it, a hospital elevator, past midnight. The doctor is alone. The lights flicker violently. When the doors slide open, a little girl in a patient gown is standing there, staring up. A bright red wristband hangs loosely from her arm. The lights die, plunging the cab into darkness. A tiny whisper fills the silence. We're still here. Doctor. Power returns. The elevator is empty, but two silhouettes linger in the steel reflection. What does that red band mean? Subscribe, because we're about to uncover the terrifying truth. Story 1. The elevator and the red band. The hum is the first thing that breaks through. Not the rhythmic beep of the monitor I'd been staring at for 6 hours, nor the wet, rhythmic suck of the aspirator. This is the low, structural hum of the building itself, the sound of ventilation and electricity, the sound of indifference. It's the sound of the world moving on while mine has just imploded. I peel the latex gloves from my hands. The snap is obscenely loud in the sudden quiet of the OR. My team is already moving. A blur of blue scrubs, cleaning, documenting, avoiding my eyes. They know. They saw it all. They saw the moment the clamp slipped, the precise second the arrhythmia cascade began, the 30-minute eternity we spent trying to claw him back from an abyss that was, it turns out, greedier than we were. Time of death, 02:47. My voice is a rasp. It doesn't sound like mine. It sounds like the voice of a man who has just failed. Not just a failure of procedure, but a fundamental, existential failure. We wear these white coats, these scrubs, like armor. We wield scalpels like they're extensions of our will. We play God, tinkering with the delicate machinery of life, and we get arrogant. We forget that the house always wins. Tonight, the house didn't just win. It raked the table clean and laughed in my face. I push through the OR doors. The corridor is a tube of fluorescent light, buzzing and sterile. The smell of bleach and iodine, usually a comfort, now smells like a cover-up. It's the perfume of mortality. My feet, encased in clogs I've worn for a decade, feel like lead blocks. Each step is a negotiation. Get to the locker room. Get out of these scrubs. Get to the car. Go home. It's a simple algorithm. It's the only thing my brain can process. I jab the elevator call button. The plastic is cool. I lean my forehead against the stainless steel doorframe. The metal is shocking cold against my sweating skin. I'm exhausted. It's not the 36-hour shift kind of tired, the kind that coffee can fix. This is a soul-deep weariness, a hollowing out. I just want to be horizontal. I just want the world to stop asking things of me. The ding is soft. The doors slide open. The car is empty, save for one person, a young woman, maybe early 20s, is leaning in the far corner, illuminated by the bright artificial glow of her phone. She's probably a visitor, waiting for news, or a freelancer pulling a late shift, tethered to the digital world. She doesn't look up, fine by me. I have no capacity for human interaction. I step in and hit the button for the ground floor. Gee! The doors slide shut, encasing us in the small metal box. I lean against the back rail. My eyes close. I can still see the bright red bloom of the hemorrhage, the frantic, useless pumping of my own hands on his chest. I lost him. I lost him. The elevator shudders to a stop. My eyes snap open. The light-up panel reads 4, the 4th floor, cardiology and recovery. Nobody from my team would be up here. The doors slide open with a quiet hiss. He's just standing there, my medical brain, the part of me that is always scanning, always diagnosing, takes inventory before my panic can catch up. Male, mid-50s, wearing a standard issue blue patient gown, the kind that ties pathetically at the back. His skin is a pale, waxy grey, a pronounced cyanosis around the lips. He is barefoot. This detail screams at me. Barefoot. The floors are freezing, slick with disinfectant. No patient walks barefoot. And then I see his neck, a deep, dark contusion, not a simple bruise. It's a circumferential abrasion, a ligature mark, as the ME would call it. It's the kind of mark a rope leaves. He doesn't move. He just stands in the doorway, framed by the hall light, and stares. His eyes are wide, glassy, and fixed. Not on the girl, on me. A cold, electric shock jolts up my spine, overriding the exhaustion. My breath hitches. It's not just a patient. It's him. It's the man from my table. The man whose chest I had just cracked open. The man who died at 02:47. This is impossible. My mind is breaking. This is a hallucination. Sleep deprivation. Stress-induced psychosis. It has to be. He takes one slow, shuffling step into the elevator. I don't scream. I react. My hand flies from the rail and slams the closed door button. I don't press it. I punch it. A rapid, desperate percussion. Close, close, damn it, close. The man keeps coming. His bare feet making a faint, wet slap sound on the linoleum. His eyes never leave mine. They are not angry. They are not sad. They are vacant, empty. The doors, with agonizing slowness, begin to slide shut. They meet in the middle, cutting him off. The last thing I see is that awful bruised neck. The elevator hums and begins its descent. I'm hyperventilating. It's not a full-on panic attack, but a series of short, sharp gasps. The breathy VO of my own internal terror. My back is pressed so hard against the metal wall, I can feel the bolts. Jesus, you okay, Doc? The voice cuts through the static. The girl, I'd forgotten she was there. I look over. She's looking at me now. Phone lowered. An expression of annoyed curiosity on her face. You look like you just saw a ghost or something. What was that about? I try to form words. My throat is dry. I'm fine. Just long shift. She quirks an eyebrow. She's not buying it. This generation, they see through everything. Right. You were machine gunning that close button like your life depended on it. Who was that guy? Was he bothering you? I need to normalize this. For her. For me. He was a patient, I manage, my voice still shaky. He shouldn't be walking around. He wasn't wearing shoes. It sounds so flimsy, so stupid. The girl scoffs, a little laugh. Oh, that guy. Yeah, he looked a little out of it. A wave of relief. So powerful it almost buckles my knees. She saw him too. I'm not crazy. He was real. A patient, wandering, confused. Maybe he didn't die. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I hallucinated the death, not the man. You saw him, I ask, desperate for confirmation. Yeah, she says, turning her attention back to her phone screen. You know, the guy with the red band. The relief vanishes, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. What band? I ask. I know hospital protocols. I know every colour-coded band we use. Allergy, red, DNR, purple, full risk, yellow, restricted limb, pink. I've seen them all. The man on my table, the man at the door. He wasn't wearing any of them. The girl sighs, as if I'm a child asking a stupid question. This kind, she says, with a trace of impatience. She lifts her left hand from her phone, and there, looped tightly around her thin wrist, is a small, simple, plastic band. It is bright, arterial red. It's not an allergy band. It's not a DNR. It's nothing I've ever seen in this hospital's procedural manual. It's just a simple, red loop. The exact same one I now remember seeing on the man's wrist as they bagged him. The one I saw on the man standing barefoot at the 4th floor door. My blood turns to ice. My gaze darts from the band back to her face. She's smiling now, a small, tight, knowing smile. It doesn't reach her eyes. They give them out, she says. her voice a casual whisper. Up on the 4th floor, and it's just a marker. The elevator dings. The sound is deafening. The light for G is illuminated. The doors slide open, revealing the bright, empty lobby. The security guard at the main desk is asleep in his chair. Everything is normal. A marker? For what? I whisper. The girl looks up from her phone, her eyes meeting mine in the polished steel of the elevator door. For the ones who check out, she says. But don't really leave. The doors are wide open. She makes no move to exit. She just stands there, bathed in her phone's light, that terrible red band on her wrist. I stumble out of the elevator, my legs shaking. I don't walk. I flee. I slam through the glass doors into the pre-dawn chill. The cold air hits my face like a slap, but it doesn't wake me up. I'm still in the nightmare. I look back through the glass. The elevator doors are still open. The girl is still inside, looking down at her screen, waiting, going back up. I'm a man of science, a man of logic, of cause and effect. But as I sprint toward my car, fumbling for my keys, one thought, one terrifying question, loops in my exhausted mind. A question that has no logical, scientific, or sane answer. Have you ever noticed a red band in a hospital elevator? The hour was obscene, a time that blurred the line between yesterday's exhaustion and tomorrow's obligations. For Dr. Mason, the hospital was not a place of healing. It was a data-driven ecosystem of acceptable losses and calculated risks. He was a senior partner in this system, an architect of its efficiencies. His life was a ledger of inputs and outcomes. And tonight, the column for sleep was deep in the red. He jabbed the elevator button, the plastic cool and indifferent under his thumb. The sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor of the surgical wing stretched out behind him. A long, white scar of a hallway. He hated this wing. It was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of recovery, but the charged, waiting silence of a system paused. Data buffering, decisions pending. The stainless steel doors slid open with a pneumatic sigh, revealing the small, mirrored box. He stepped inside, the scent of industrial cleaner and stale air clinging to the enclosed space. He pressed the button for the ground floor. G, the symbol of his escape. The doors began to slide shut, reducing the brightly lit corridor to a closing vertical slit of light. And then, darkness. Not just darkness, a stop. A heavy, definitive, mechanical thud resonated through the floor. A sound like a giant's hand clamping down on the roof of the car. The elevator didn't just stop, it was seized. The primary lights vanished, extinguished in an instant. The emergency light, a weak, sickly yellow bulb in the ceiling, failed to engage. There was no flicker, no stutter, just an absolute, suffocating void. It was a total system failure. Mason froze. This was not in the protocol. Sensory deprivation, they called it. The brain, stripped of its primary input, begins to feed on itself. The first thing to go was perspective. The 2.5 by 2.5 meter box felt suddenly infinite, and yet claustrophobically tight. The air became thick, heavy, each molecule a particle of dust he was forced to inhale. He could smell the ozone from the fried circuit, a sharp metallic tang that reminded him of cauterization. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, his hand brushing against the cold steel wall. His fingers, so precise and steady hours ago while signing off on discharge papers, now felt clumsy, thick, useless. And then, the silence, which had been a void, became a presence. It was the silence of a held breath, an unasked question, the hum of the building, the distant rhythm of life support systems, the ding of other elevators, all gone. It was just him and the metal box, suspended in an abyss between floors. He could hear his own heart, a frantic, inefficient pump against his ribs. He could hear the faint whisper of his own breathing, and he could hear something else. It was not a sound. It was the idea of a sound. a faint pressure against his right ear, as if someone had leaned in close, their lips almost brushing his skin. The air shifted, displacing itself for a mass that was not his own. Then, the whisper. It was not loud. It was not a scream. It was a statement of fact, a line item on a long overdue invoice, a dry, sibilant, plural voice. We're still here. We. Mason's blood didn't just run cold. It turned to static. His mind, trained for diagnosis, scrambled for a rational explanation. Acoustics, the shaft, stress-induced auditory hallucination. The pressure differential is causing the car to resonate, but his professional, logical mind was being suffocated by a more primal, animal terror. The we had unlocked a file he had personally buried, encrypted, and marked as closed. He hadn't just lost a patient, he had erased one. The file for case 449B, the girl, the one whose chart had been a minefield of contraindications. A problem he solved with an expedited high-risk procedure, a procedure he'd championed as innovative, but knew was a gamble. When she'd coded on the table, it wasn't a tragedy, it was an inconvenience. It was bad data that skewed his success rates, so he'd signed the papers. He'd altered the timestamp on the initial event. He'd dictated a report that framed the outcome as an unavoidable complication of her pre-existing condition, not a direct consequence of his hubris. He had signed her, and her family's unanswered questions, dead and buried. We're still here. The we was the girl, and the we was the truth. It was the unfinished business he had tried to write off as a loss. A violent shudder racked the elevator car. The emergency light above him flickered once, a single, agonizing strobe. In that half-second of amber light, he wasn't alone. But he didn't see anything. He felt it. The proximity of a second body, small, cold, and waiting. Then, with the grinding groan of a tomb being forced open, the power returned. The main lights flickered, buzzed, and then flooded the car with a harsh, unforgiving white. The elevator jolted, and the doors slid open. He wasn't on the ground floor. He was on the 12th. The morgue. Mason didn't think. He didn't process. He ran. He burst from the elevator, a purely instinctual, reptilian flight response. His $2,000 leather-soled shoes slipped on the polished linoleum, and he nearly went down, catching himself on the wall. He was a doctor, a man of science and steel, reduced to a terrified animal. He stumbled a few feet down the dark corridor, his lungs burning. The only sound was the fading, distant beep of a heart monitor from a far-off ward. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of life, fading as he ran from it. Something made him stop. A noise. Shh, clack. The sound of the elevator doors behind him, beginning to close. He turned. He had to. He had to see. He had to know. The doors were sliding shut, the two halves of polished steel coming together. For a brief, terrible moment, they were a perfect mirror. He saw his own reflection first, a man in a rumpled suit, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terror that disgusted him. But he was not alone in the reflection. Standing next to his mirrored image, just behind his shoulder, were two silhouettes. They were not reflections, they were absences, dark shapes imprinted on the steel. One was small, unmistakably the shape of a young girl. The other was taller, more abstract, a column of pure shadow that seemed to drink the light around it. It stood with the girl, a guardian, a partner. It was his guilt, given form. It was his signature on the line. It was the unfinished business. The paired silhouettes stood side by side, the girl and her grievance. The doors met in the middle with a soft, final thunk. The image was gone. Mason was left alone in the corridor, panting, the silence now screaming in his ears. He looked up, his gaze frantic, searching for an escape, an anchor. His eyes smashed into the signage on the wall. A cold, hard, rectangular fact. The elevator hadn't malfunctioned. It had brought him to the precise, logistical source of his sin. The morgue, where she had gone, the labs, where the data was processed, and the archives, where the files he thought he'd buried were waiting, that we were still here, and now they were waiting for him. Story 2. 3 departments in a line. In the world of 24/7 operations and high-value real estate, the third shift is its own sovereign entity. It is a kingdom of polished marble, humming HVAC, and profound, aseptic silence. For the night shift facilities manager, a man whose professionalism was his armor, this silence was his workspace. He wasn't a janitor, he was the building's nocturnal guardian, ensuring the billion-dollar asset was pristine for the executives, the freelancers, and the innovators who would populate it come sunrise. His predecessor, a man with eyes that had seen too many empty corridors at 3 a.m., had given him the handover briefing. It was less of a manual and more of a set of inflexible protocols. This building, it's a high-performance machine, the old-timer had said, not looking at him, but at the bank of security monitors. And like any machine, it has its quirks. Your job isn't to understand them. Your job is to follow procedure. Rule 1, you hear a knock. You don't answer. It's just the building settling. Rule 2, you see something on the periphery. You don't look. It's just the light playing tricks. Rule 3, and this is the most important. If you hear a voice, if anything speaks to you, you do not acknowledge it. You are alone on these floors. Period. Breach protocol. And you compromise the environment. Tonight, the environment felt particularly receptive. The air was static, clinging. He was on the 12th floor, a prestigious zone leased by a high-risk venture capital firm. His route took him past Unit 12 to 3. The office was dark, the glass doors locked. Then it came. Knock, knock, knock. It was not the random ticking of pipes. This was measured, deliberate, and resonant. It came from the inside of the locked office. It was a sound engineered to solicit a response. He pictured a client waiting impatiently, a partner locked out. But he knew the floor was empty. His access logs confirmed it. He froze, his cart's wheels emitting a low hum. The sound demanded an answer. Who's there? Instead, he gripped the handle of his cart, the cold metal, a grounding sensation. Protocol, do not answer. He forced his feet to move, the squeak of his soles on the polished concrete seeming obscenely loud. He was a professional. He was not paid to be curious. He was paid to be disciplined. He continued his route, the echo of those 3 knocks following him down the hall. He turned the corner, heading toward the service elevator. His destination was the 28th floor, but his small cart-mounted monitor flickered, a silent alert. Motion detected, Unit 12-4. He paused. 12-4 was a data analysis startup, a room filled with server racks and empty workstations. He tapped the screen, pulling up the live feed. The image was useless. It was a cascade of digital snow, a rolling bar of static that suggested severe signal interference. This wasn't a glitch. This was a system-wide failure for that specific camera. He toggled to the camera in the hall facing 12-4. The image was perfect, stable, showing an empty corridor. He accessed the event log. The system was insistent. 03:44:17 a.m. Motion detected 12-4 interior. Subject, indeterminate. He triggered the playback buffer, reviewing the fraction of a second before the feed collapsed. The footage was grainy, the IR filter struggling. For a single frame, the room was visible. Empty desks, blinking server lights, and in the center, where no solid object existed, the camera registered a subject chogon. It wasn't a person, it was a distortion, a blur in the visual data. A smudge of impossible shadow that had the shape and mass of a man, but no physical properties. The system registered motion without subject, a logical impossibility. As he watched the corrupted feed loop, a new sensation crept over him. The air temperature plummeted. This wasn't a draft from a vent. This was a cold spot, a thermodynamic void that was spreading from the door of 12-4. He could see his own breath misting in the air. Protocol. Do not look. He wanted, desperately, to turn his head, to stare at the frosted glass of the 12-4 door. He felt an intense, predatory pressure, as if something was standing just on the other side, studying him. He kept his eyes locked on his monitor. He was an entrepreneur in his own right. His business was survival. Acknowledging the anomaly was a bad investment. He pushed his cart forward, the wheels moving from the ambient warmth of the hall into the biting cold, and then back out again. He never turned his head. The final task was on 28. He reached the main elevator bank. These were high-speed, smart system lifts, marvels of modern engineering. He badged in, the secure call system registering his credentials. The ride up was silent, a smooth, pressurized ascent. The elevator slowed. Ding! The doors opened. But it wasn't the 28th floor. The 28th floor was a brightly lit executive lounge, all brushed steel and white oak. This was a void. The elevator, in a complete breach of spatial and mechanical logic, had opened on both sides. In front of him and behind him was a single, unified space of pitch-black darkness. It was a cavernous, impossible room that couldn't exist in the building's infrastructure. The darkness was absolute, absorbing the light from the elevator cab. It smelled of ozone, wet concrete, and something ancient, like filed-away paper decaying into dust. It was the smell of a forgotten place. And from that suffocating darkness, a voice spoke. It was not a whisper. It was a clear, polite, almost corporate tone. It was a mimic voice, synthesized from 1,000 fragmented conversations, yet chillingly familiar. Come right in. It was an invitation, a business proposal, a closing statement, protocol. Do not acknowledge. His training and his survival instinct fused. He did not speak. He did not step out. He did not even breathe. His thumb, slick with sweat, hammered the door close button. The button was unresponsive. The elevator was being held. We've been expecting you. Come right in. The voice was closer. He could feel the cold radiating from the impossible space, pulling at him. He broke the second rule. He looked. He saw nothing but the profound, hungry dark. But he felt the pressure of an occupant, a stakeholder waiting for his acceptance. He slammed his entire palm against the control panel, not just the button. The system registered the panic input. The doors shuddered, fighting an unseen force, and began to slide closed, slicing the darkness in half. They sealed with a pneumatic thump. The elevator dropped a few feet, a sickening lurch. Before re-engaging its tracks, it ascended. And a moment later, ding! The doors opened to the 28th floor, bright lights, white oak, sterile air, as if nothing had happened. He finished his shift in a state of controlled shock. The next day, the building's operations director reviewed the incident logs, 3 separate, anomalous events, an acoustic disturbance on 12, a critical sensor failure on 12, a primary lift override on 28. To a normal analyst, they were unrelated system errors. But the director was not a normal analyst. He was a problem solver, and he suspected these were not bugs, but features of a system he didn't understand. He pulled the building's core archives, not just the new blueprints, but the old ones, the ones from the structure that had been demolished, or rather, partially demolished and built upon, to make way for this modern tower. He found it. An archival blueprint of the original property. It was an old state psychiatric wing, decommissioned decades ago for its irregular methodologies. He imported the old floor plan into the new system, overlaying it on the current architectural schematic. His blood ran cold. He drew a single, straight, red line. It passed directly through Unit 12-3, the site of the 3 knocks. It continued, intersecting precisely with Unit 12-4, the site of the motion sensor anomaly. It ascended, terminating exactly at the elevator shaft adjacent to Unit 28-1, the point of the impossible spatial breach. It wasn't 3 haunted units. It was one single, a continuous path, a line. It was the main corridor of the old psych wing, an artery of trauma and residual energy that the new construction had failed to sever. The entity wasn't in the rooms. It was traveling through them. The knocks were a probe. The CCTV glitch, was it passing a sensor? The elevator, that was an attempt to open a permanent doorway. The director looked at the red line, this supernatural thoroughfare embedded in his multi-billion-dollar asset. The rules given to the night staff suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. They weren't rules of maintenance. They were terms of a ceasefire. Do not answer. Do not look. Do not acknowledge. Because if you do, you are no longer staff. You are a new acquisition. You are, as the voice so politely invited, in the world of 24/7 operations and high-value real estate. The third shift is its own sovereign entity. It is a kingdom of polished marble, humming HVAC, and profound, aseptic silence. For the night shift facilities manager, a man whose professionalism was his armor, this silence was his workspace. He wasn't a janitor. He was the building's nocturnal guardian, ensuring the billion-dollar asset was pristine for the executives, the freelancers, and the innovators who would populate it come sunrise. His predecessor, a man with eyes that had seen too many empty corridors at 3 a.m., had given him the handover briefing. It was less of a manual and more of a set of inflexible protocols. This building, it's a high-performance machine, the old-timer had said, not looking at him, but at the bank of security monitors. And like any machine, it has its quirks. Your job isn't to understand them. Your job is to follow procedure. Rule 1. You hear a knock. You don't answer. It's just the building settling. Rule 2. You see something on the periphery. You don't look. It's just the light playing tricks. Rule 3. And this is the most important. If you hear a voice, if anything speaks to you, you do not acknowledge it. You are alone on these floors. Period. Breach protocol, and you compromise the environment. Tonight, the environment felt particularly receptive. The air was static, clinging. He was on the 12th floor, a prestigious zone leased by a high-risk venture capital firm. His route took him past Unit 12-3. The office was dark, the glass doors locked. Then it came. Knock, knock, knock. It was not the random ticking of pipes. This was measured, deliberate, and resonant. It came from the inside of the locked office. It was a sound engineered to solicit a response. He pictured a client waiting impatiently, a partner locked out, but he knew the floor was empty. His access logs confirmed it. He froze, his cart's wheels emitting a low hum. The sound demanded an answer. Who's there? Instead, he gripped the handle of his cart, the cold metal a grounding sensation. Protocol. Do not answer. He forced his feet to move, the squeak of his soles on the polished concrete seeming obscenely loud. He was a professional. He was not paid to be curious. He was paid to be disciplined. He continued his route, the echo of those 3 knocks following him down the hall. He turned the corner, heading toward the service elevator. His destination was the 28th floor, but his small cart-mounted monitor flickered. A silent alert. Motion detected, Unit 12-4. He paused. 12-4 was a data analysis startup, a room filled with server racks and empty workstations. He tapped the screen, pulling up the live feed. The image was useless. It was a cascade of digital snow, a rolling bar of static that suggested severe signal interference. This wasn't a glitch. This was a system-wide failure for that specific camera. He toggled to the camera in the hall facing 12-4. The image was perfect, stable, showing an empty corridor. He accessed the event log. The system was insistent. 03:44:17 a.m. Motion detected 12-4 interior. Subject, indeterminate. He triggered the playback buffer, reviewing the fraction of a second before the feed collapsed. The footage was grainy, the IR filter struggling. For a single frame, the room was visible, empty desks, blinking server lights. And in the center, where no solid object existed, the camera registered a subject. It wasn't a person, it was a distortion, a blur in the visual data, a smudge of impossible shadow that had the shape and mass of a man, but no physical properties. The system registered motion without subject, a logical impossibility. As he watched the corrupted feed loop, a new sensation crept over him. The air temperature plummeted. This wasn't a draft from a vent. This was a cold spot, a thermodynamic void that was spreading from the door of 1224. He could see his own breath misting in the air. Protocol, do not look. He wanted, desperately, to turn his head, to stare at the frosted glass of the 12-4 door. He felt an intense, predatory pressure, as if something was standing just on the other side, studying him. He kept his eyes locked on his monitor. He was an entrepreneur in his own right. His business was survival. Acknowledging the anomaly was a bad investment. He pushed his cart forward, the wheels moving from the ambient warmth of the hall into the biting cold, and then back out again. He never turned his head. The final task was on 28. He reached the main elevator bank. These were high-speed, smart system lifts, marvels of modern engineering. He badged in, the secure call system registering his credentials. The ride up was silent, a smooth, pressurized ascent. The elevator slowed. Ding! The doors opened. But it wasn't the 28th floor. The 28th floor was a brightly lit executive lounge, all brushed steel and white oak. This was a void. The elevator, in a complete breach of spatial and mechanical logic, had opened on both sides. In front of him and behind him was a single unified space of pitch-black darkness. It was a cavernous, impossible room that couldn't exist in the building's infrastructure. The darkness was absolute, absorbing the light from the elevator cab. It smelled of ozone, wet concrete, and something ancient, like filed-away paper decaying into dust. It was the smell of a forgotten place. And from that suffocating darkness, a voice spoke. It was not a whisper. It was a clear, polite, almost corporate tone. It was a mimic voice, synthesized from 1,000 fragmented conversations, yet chillingly familiar. Come right in. It was an invitation, a business proposal, a closing statement. Protocol, do not acknowledge. His training and his survival instinct fused. He did not speak. He did not step out. He did not even breathe. His thumb, slick with sweat, hammered the door close button. The button was unresponsive. The elevator was being held. We've been expecting you. Come right in. The voice was closer. He could feel the cold radiating from the impossible space, pulling at him. He broke the second rule. He looked. He saw nothing but the profound, hungry dark. But he felt the pressure of an occupant, a stakeholder waiting for his acceptance. He slammed his entire palm against the control panel, not just the button. The system registered the panic input. The doors shuddered, fighting an unseen force, and began to slide closed, slicing the darkness in half. They sealed with a pneumatic thump. The elevator dropped a few feet, a sickening lurch. Before re-engaging its tracks, it ascended, and a moment later, ding! The doors opened to the 28th floor. Bright lights, white oak, sterile air, as if nothing had happened. He finished his shift in a state of controlled shock. The next day, the building's operations director reviewed the incident logs. 3 separate, anomalous events: an acoustic disturbance on 12, a critical sensor failure on 12, a primary lift override on 28. To a normal analyst, they were unrelated system errors. But the director was not a normal analyst. He was a problem solver, and he suspected these were not bugs, but features of a system he didn't understand. He pulled the building's core archives, not just the new blueprints, but the old ones. The ones from the structure that had been demolished, or rather, partially demolished and built upon, to make way for this modern tower. He found it, an archival blueprint of the original property. It was an old state psychiatric wing, decommissioned decades ago for its irregular methodologies. He imported the old floor plan into the new system, overlaying it on the current architectural schematic. His blood ran cold. He drew a single, straight, red line. It passed directly through Unit 12-3, the site of the 3 knocks. It continued, intersecting precisely with Unit 12-4, the site of the motion sensor anomaly. It ascended, terminating exactly at the elevator shaft, adjacent to Unit 28-1, the point of the impossible spatial breach. It wasn't 3 haunted units. It was one single, continuous path, a line. It was the main corridor of the old psych wing, an artery of trauma and residual energy that the new construction had failed to sever. The entity wasn't in the rooms. It was travelling through them. The knocks were a probe. The CCTV glitch was it passing a sensor. The elevator. That was an attempt to open a permanent doorway. The director looked at the red line, this supernatural thoroughfare embedded in his multi-billion-dollar asset. The rules given to the night staff suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. They weren't rules of maintenance. They were terms of a ceasefire. Do not answer. Do not look. Do not acknowledge, because if you do, you are no longer staff. You are a new acquisition. You are, as the voice so politely invited, in Story 3, Edna and the Unplugged TV. In the business of elder care, you become intimately familiar with the concept of procedure. We don't call it death. We call it a passing. When a resident passes, a new set of processes kicks in. It's a workflow, efficient and impersonal. First, the medical certifications, then the family liaison, finally, the deep sanitation and reset of the room. That's where I was, room 12B. Until 3 days ago, this was Edna's room. Edna was a lot. She was a character, a fixed point in the shift. You always knew where she was because you could hear her. A booming, unfiltered laugh that would rattle the tea trolley. She lived in a rotation of garish, fuzzy tops, but her favourite was a lurid orange thing that practically glowed in the dark. And she was obsessed, utterly devoted, to game shows, every night, without fail. 9:30 p.m. The Price is Right. Wheel of Fortune. Catchphrase. It didn't matter. To her, it was all high drama. The volume would be cranked to a level that rattled the dentures of the resident next door. But the most distinct sound of Edna wasn't the laugh or the TV. It was the approach. She used a heavy-duty aluminium walker, and one of the rubber feet was missing. The sound of her arrival was an unmistakable 3-beat rhythm on the linoleum floor. Shuffle, shuffle, scrape. Now, the room was silent and sterile. This was day 3 of the reset. The mattress had been incinerated. The personal effects were bagged and labelled, waiting for a family member who seemed in no hurry to collect them. The air, which used to smell of boiled sweets and talcum powder, now stung the nostrils with industrial-strength disinfectant. It was an empty, aseptic box waiting for the next occupant. My job was to sign off on the final inventory. I was ticking boxes on a tablet, a dull, bureaucratic end to a life. 9:28 p.m. I was tired. I wanted a cup of tea and 5 minutes of silence before tackling the medication rounds. At 9:30 p.m. precisely, the room exploded with the sound of a cheering crowd and triumphant synthesized trumpets. I nearly dropped the tablet. The television, a standard issue 32-inch mounted on the wall, was blazing with light, showing a man in a glittery suit gesturing wildly at a new speedboat. My first thought wasn't paranormal, it was annoyance. For God's sake, I muttered, the cleaning crew must have left it on. I grabbed the remote from the disinfectant bag, hit the power button. Nothing. I mashed the button. The show played on. I checked the batteries. They were fine. I marched over to the wall socket, annoyed at the delay. I grabbed the plug, a standard 3-prong, and yanked it firmly from the wall. The screen went black. The sound cut off. Silence. Right, I said to the empty room. Job done. I tossed the useless remote onto the strip bed, grabbed the power cord, and deliberately draped it over the small wall-mounted writing desk. It was hanging free, the prongs glinting in the overhead light. A good 6 inches from the socket, I finished my checklist, signed off, and left. The next night, I was on the same corridor. A morbid, professional curiosity pulled me back. I told myself I was just double-checking the sanitation seal on the door. I let myself into the cold, dark room. The bleach smell was already fading, leaving a dull, empty scent. It was 9:25 p.m. I'm a rational person. I'm a freelancer, essentially, in the healthcare trade. I deal with the tangible, blood pressure, medication dosages, broken hips. I don't do ghosts. If something happens, it has a cause, a short circuit, a backup battery, a prank by a night shift colleague. I was going to test the hypothesis. I located the remote, still on the bed. I took the batteries out and put them in my pocket. I checked the plug. It was exactly where I had left it, hanging limply over the desk. The cord was coiled on the floor. The TV was a dead, dark rectangle, to be absolutely, clinically certain. I took the remote itself and walked down the hall to the staff room. I opened the biscuit tin, the one we hide the good chocolate digestives in, and dropped the remote inside, putting the lid back on with a satisfying thump. Back in 12B, I stood by the door. 9:29 p.m. The room was dark, save for the weak sodium light from the car park filtering through the window. I could see the outline of the plug, distinct against the magnolia-painted wall, unplugged, remote hidden, batteries in my pocket. It was a controlled experiment. 9:30 p.m. Nothing. 9:31 p.m. Silence. I smiled, feeling a little ridiculous. Of course, it was a power surge issue, a faulty capacitor, something for the maintenance chap to deal with. I'd been working too many doubles. I turned to leave. At 9:32 p.m., the sound hit me like a physical blow, a deafening roar of applause. I spun around. The television was on. It was blasting the same game show, the same host, the same retina-searing colours. The glow filled the sterile room, casting harsh shadows that jumped and danced. My pulse didn't just quicken, it felt like it had stopped. I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted from the screen to the wall. There was the money shot, the proof, the absolute physics-defying impossibility. The power cord was still hanging over the desk. It hadn't moved an inch. Its black cable snaked down to the floor, inert. The wall socket next to it was visibly empty. The TV was on, and it was not plugged in. I stood there, frozen, trying to make the data compute. Entrepreneurs deal with risk. I thought, wildly, this is just a new kind of risk. But my brain had no framework for this. The system was broken. The sound from the speakers began to change. The slick, pre-recorded cheering of the crowd warped. It pitched down, slowing, stretching into a digital groan that turned into a deafening, white noise burst of static. Shah! The image on the screen tore, folding in on itself. The glittery host dissolved into horizontal bars of colour. And then, through the static, I heard it. A faint, wheezing cackle. It wasn't the host. It wasn't the audience. It was Edna's laugh. That rattling, unfiltered boom, now sounding thin and reedy, as if coming from the end of a long, wet tunnel. The screen glitched one last time and went dark. Not off, but a deep, reflective black. A mirror. I could see the room reflected in it. The empty bed. The window. My own terrified, pale face. I stared, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the static to return, waiting for anything. And I saw it. The screen was reflecting the room, but the reflection was wrong. I could see myself, standing by the door, and reflected next to the bed, where there was nothing but air, was a splash of colour, a lurid, fuzzy orange. I squinted, my mind refusing to process the image. The reflection shifted. In the dark glass, a figure was resolving. It was standing by the mattress, looking not at the TV, but out of it, looking directly at me. It was Edna. Her head was tilted, her mouth open in that silent, roaring laugh. I took a step back, my hand fumbling for the door handle. This was the safety beat. This was the get the hell out moment. My training screamed exit, alert, contain. But how do you contain this? As my hand hit the metal handle, the single light in the corridor outside the room, the small station light above the door, buzzed and flickered. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bink. It went out, plunging the doorway into shadow. I was alone in the dark with the dead, black screen, and from the corridor behind me, from the darkness I was about to step into, I heard it, a sound on the linoleum, shuffle, shuffle, scrape. Story 4. The 1950s chapel. There's a peculiar brand of optimism required to sign a lease for an office in a building that still smells faintly of floor polish and regret. St. Jude's Hospital had been decommissioned decades ago, a sprawling Victorian monolith of red brick and grey slate. In the relentless march of urban renewal, it had been gutted and rebranded as the Priory, a co-working space for Bath's burgeoning creative class. It was quirky, the letting agent had said, full of character. For Ryan, a freelance data analyst, character was just a synonym for compromise, but the rent was scandalously cheap, and his assigned space, 4B, was certainly memorable. It was the old hospital chapel. The main room was an absurd mix of sacred and mundane. His standing desk, an ergonomic chair, sat awkwardly on the original parquet flooring, facing not a window, but an altar-like alcove. To his left, towering stained glass windows depicted angular saints, their faces muted by a century of grime. They cast fractured, funereal pools of red and blue light across the floor. Along the far wall, a line of dark, heavy wooden pews sat in silent judgment, displaced from their original purpose, but too solid to be discarded. The only modern touch was a small brass dedication plaque near the door, polished to a high shine. This chapel was reconsecrated in the service of healing, 1951. Ryan was a man of logic. He lived by spreadsheets and data models. The archaic setting was an ironic backdrop to his digital-first life. And for the first week, it was just that, a backdrop. He'd heard the stories from other tenants while making a brew in the communal kitchen. They were the usual ghost-in-the-machine tales that old buildings collect. But they always mentioned his office. "You're in the chapel?" a graphic designer from 3A had asked, her eyes widening slightly. "We call that the crying room." "Charming," Ryan replied, stirring his tea. "Is that supposed to be a crack about my client feedback?" She hadn't laughed. "Just gets a bit heavy in there, apparently. The old porters used it as a quiet room for families. You know, after..." Ryan dismissed it. He had a Q4 projections report due, and the only spirit he was interested in was the one in his coffee mug. The first incident was mundane. He returned from the kitchen, tea in hand, to find his office chair, a high-tech mesh contraption that had cost him a small fortune, was no longer facing his monitor. It had been turned precisely 180 degrees, its back to the desk, facing the darkest corner of the room, where the pews met the wall. He frowned. He didn't remember doing that. He must have spun it absently as he stood up. He was tired, too much screen time. He righted the chair and got back to work. A few days later, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just the physical chill of a poorly insulated Grade 2 listed building. This was a different cold. It was a dense, localized pressure that seemed to settle in the center of the room. Ryan would be deep in code, and suddenly the air would thicken, becoming heavy and static-filled, as if the small chapel was holding its breath. Then came the physical sensation. He was on a Zoom call with a client in New York, explaining data regression. when a sudden, crushing weight settled on his chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was an external pressure, an invisible hand pressing down on his sternum. It was accompanied by a profound, inexplicable wave of despondency, a grief so potent it soured his mouth. "Ryan, you all right, mate?" The client's voice crackled through his headset. Ryan gasped, pulling at his collar. "Fine," he managed, blaming a bad lunch. "Just indigestion." The feeling passed as suddenly as it arrived, leaving him shaky and unnerved. He finished the call, shut his laptop, and left early. The next day, he was working late, chasing a deadline. The priory was silent, the hallways dark. The only sound in the chapel was the click-clack of his mechanical keyboard. The stained glass windows were black, opaque mirrors, offering no view of the outside world. Click, clack, click. He stopped. A sound. It was faint, almost subliminal, a soft, rhythmic sobbing. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the floor above. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room, from the corner where the chair had turned. "Hello?" Ryan called out, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the vaulted space. The crying stopped. The silence that rushed in was worse. It was absolute, heavy, and watchful, and the door swung shut. It wasn't a draft. The heavy oak door moved with a slow, deliberate grace, closing firmly into its frame with a final, definitive click. Ryan's heart hammered. He was locked in. He stood up, his own chair rolling back with a squeak. "Right," he said to the empty room, his voice tight. "That's just not on." He was trying for annoyed, but it came out as dread. He walked to the door and grabbed the heavy brass handle. It was stiff, but it turned. He pulled it open, checked the empty, fluorescent-lit corridor, and then closed it again, ensuring it was latched. He was rattled. This was ridiculous. It was an old building. Old buildings have drafts. Old buildings make noises. He turned back to his desk, and his blood ran cold. His chair. It was turned again, facing the wall. He stared at it, the rational part of his brain frantically trying to build a case for... What? A practical joke? A complex mechanism of air pressure? Then the pressure returned to his chest, 10 times stronger than before. It wasn't just a weight, it was an iron band, squeezing the air from his lungs. He stumbled back, leaning against a pew, fighting for breath. The grief was overwhelming. It wasn't his. It was a foreign, invasive emotion, a torrent of loss, of failure, of utter despair. A whisper, thin as paper, cut through the silence. It didn't enter his ears, it just appeared in his head. "Help her." It was a woman's voice, exhausted and broken. "Who?" Ryan whispered, pressing his hand to his chest. "Help who?" "Help her." His eyes darted around the room, searching the shadows, the alcove, the dark spaces under the pews. Nothing, just his desk, his chair, and the silent, staring saints in the glass. He looked at the window, at the deep reds and blues. He could see his own terrified reflection in the dark glass, his pale face, his wide eyes, his hand clutching his chest. And he saw the nurse. She wasn't in the room with him. She was only in the reflection, a silhouette, standing directly behind his empty office chair. The shape was unmistakable. The flared skirt, the cinched waist, the small, starched cap of a 1950s-era uniform. She was transparent, a shape defined only by the distorted colours of the glass. She was perfectly still, her head bowed, her entire form radiating an aura of impenetrable sorrow. Ryan didn't breathe. He stared, frozen, at the impossible image, the reflection of his office, and this imprint, this psychic stain left behind. As he watched, the silhouette in the glass slowly raised its head. It had no features, just a smooth, dark oval. But he knew, with chilling certainty, it was looking at him. The pressure on his chest became unbearable. The whisper came one last time, not a plea, but a statement of fact, a loop of eternal, unresolved pain. "Help her!" Ryan broke. He lunged for the door, threw it open, and ran. He didn't grab his laptop, his coat, or his keys. He fled down the corridor, past the graphic designer's darkened studio, past the empty kitchen, and didn't stop until he was outside in the cold, wet street, gulping down the night air. He never went back into that room. The next morning, he emailed the building manager, a no-nonsense woman named Sharon, and requested an immediate transfer. He was bracing for an argument, for fees, for the loss of his deposit. He met her in the bright, sterile reception area. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even ask why. She simply slid a standard transfer form across the desk. "Suite 2C is available," she said, tapping the form with her pen. "Second floor, much better light, no extra charge." Ryan signed, his hand still unsteady. "Sharon," he said, needing to know. "The chapel, room 4B. "What?" She sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "You're not the first, love, and you won't be the last. We've had 3 startups break their lease in there in 2 years." "But what is it?" Sharon leaned forward, lowering her voice. "St. Jude's was a maternity hospital, back in the day. The chapel, that dedication plaque, 1951. It was put up after a tragedy. A young nurse had a breakdown after a baby died on her watch. A very difficult birth." She paused, looking towards the 4th floor wing. "They found her in the chapel. She'd taken her own life. She was apparently kneeling in that corner, by the wall, kept saying she'd failed, that she couldn't help her." Ryan felt the cold return, even in the warm reception, the turned chair, the pressure, the voice. "It's just a story," Sharon said, a little too quickly, shuffling her papers. "Probably just bad ventilation. Either way, 2C is yours from noon." Ryan nodded, took his new key, and walked away. He left his expensive chair, his monitor, and his favourite mug in the chapel. They could keep them. He was a man of logic, and his logic dictated that some data points were not meant to be analysed. They were meant to be avoided. As he left the building, he looked up at the stained glass window of room 4B. In the bright morning light, the saints looked almost cheerful, their red and blue robes vibrant, revealing nothing of the silhouette they held captive in their reflection. The red thread, "When the dead still call." The automated doors hissed open, admitting him not just to the building, but to a state of being. Hospitals are not buildings, they are archives. David understood this on a professional level. As an entrepreneur, he dealt in systems, data, and efficiencies. He saw the modern hospital lobby not as a place of healing, but as a high-stakes corporate environment. The air, chilled to a precise, clinical blue degree, smelled of industrial disinfectant and burnt coffee. A towering digital display scrolled through donor names, a silent testament to the capital required to forestall the inevitable. It was all so clean, so managed. But tonight, the system was failing, or perhaps it was working too well. He hadn't intended to come back. It had been 6 months since Clara died in this very building. 6 months of managing her estate, methodically dismantling the architecture of their shared life, and pouring himself into the work that had always been his refuge. He was a man who solved problems. Yet, here he was, after midnight, drawn back by a compulsion he couldn't itemize or delegate. The main elevators were asleep. He followed the pale, blue-lit signs for the staff and patient transfer lifts at the rear of the atrium. The silence of the lobby was oppressive, broken only by the squeak of his own leather-soled shoes. A sound too expensive, too alive for this space. The elevator arrived with a soft, synthetic chime. Ding! He stepped inside. The car was sterile, panelled in the same cold blue as the walls. Smelling faintly of ozone, he pressed the button for the 7th floor. Cardiac care. The doors slid shut, sealing him in. The 7th floor was a different world. The corporate sheen of the lobby was gone. replaced by a more functional, worn-in sterility. Here, the clinical blue was softer, scuffed at the corners by gurneys and service carts. The air was thicker, heavier with the residual frequencies of human crisis. This was the factory floor. He knew the way by a terrible, ingrained memory. Left past the nurses' station, itself a dormant island of screens and binders, right at the fire extinguisher. Third door on the left, room 712. The door was ajar. A sliver of grainy light from the hallway cut across the linoleum. He pushed it open. The room was empty, terminally clean. The bed was made with crisp, white sheets pulled so tight they looked like solid plastic. The guest chair was angled precisely at 45 degrees to the bed. The machinery that had crowded the space, the IV poles, the heart monitor, the ventilator, was gone. All that remained was the wall-mounted television. Its screen, a dark, reflective void. He stepped inside, and the temperature seemed to drop. The air was still, yet it felt occupied, charged. This, he thought, is the answer to the question, what do hospitals keep after the living leave? They keep the echo. They keep the routine. Clara had been a creature of routine, even in her final days. Doped on medication that blurred the world, she insisted on her routines. And her most persistent, most annoying habit was the television. She never watched it. She just needed the sound. It fills the silence. Dave, she'd whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The silence is too loud. She'd keep it tuned to a dead channel. The roar of white noise was her companion, a digital campfire against the encroaching dark. He'd hated it. It felt like an admission of defeat, the sound of entropy. He stood in the center of the room, listening. He could almost hear it, a faint, high-pitched ringing in his ears, the ghost of the static, the thin veil. His gaze fell on the bedside table, empty. He remembered, vividly, the plastic water carafe, the untouched cup of apple jelly, and, coiled beside it, the red bracelet. It wasn't just a red bracelet. It was the bracelet. The one they snapped onto her wrist upon admission, red, in hospital semiotics, was the color of warning, allergy, full risk, DNR, for him. That red plastic band had become the ultimate code, the marker of her transition from a person to a problem to be managed. It was the data point signifying the end of the line, a red thread tying her to this place. He sank into the visitor's chair. The vinyl was cold against his neck. He closed his eyes, and the memories he'd so carefully archived came flooding back. The exhaustion, the smell of sickness, the guilt. Thump, thump, thump. His eyes snapped open. The sound was soft, external. It was the building's circulation, the pipes in the wall. He was a rational man. He was just tired, his mind projecting. He took a deep breath, forcing the clinical blue air into his lungs. He would count to 10, then he would leave. This was a mistake, a morbid pilgrimage. Thump, thump, thump. It was clearer this time. Not pipes. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was a knock. 3 distinct impacts, spaced precisely. An invitation. It came from the wall shared with the bathroom. He stared at the bathroom door. "Who's there?" he whispered. The word felt clumsy, loud in the charged silence. The room's only answer was the sudden, violent activation of the television. It didn't just turn on. It exploded into life. The screen flashed from black to a blinding, roaring snowstorm of static. The sound was immense, not a hiss, but a physical pressure that filled his ears and vibrated in his chest. It was the sound she had used to fill the silence, now magnified into a weapon. The static wasn't just noise, it was the thin veil, now torn open. The random pixels churned, coalescing into phantom shapes, like faces in a cloud. He saw the flicker of the cardiac monitor, the shadow of the IV pole, the concave shape of the pillow, and then, through the wall of sound, a voice, a digital rasp. buried deep within the frequency. It was barely a whisper, a fragmented loop fighting its way through the white noise. "Help her!" David froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin as cold as the vinyl chair. Help her! It was the guilt. It was the unfinished care. It was the moment he had replayed 1,000 times. The one he had edited and rationalized until it was smooth. He had stepped out, just for a coffee, just for 10 minutes. The alarm had sounded when he was still at the lift bay. By the time he'd sprinted back, the room was full of blue scrubs. The crash cart was there, and they were working on her. But he hadn't been there. He hadn't held her hand. He hadn't said goodbye. He had been getting coffee while she died. "I tried," he whispered to the empty, roaring room. "I couldn't. I didn't know." The knocking came again, this time not from the wall, but from the window. Knock, 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 hard, sharp, imperative, 7 floors up. The static on the TV pitched higher, screaming. The fragmented voice became clearer, more desperate. "Help her! Help her! Help her!" It wasn't her voice. It was his own. It was his own failure, his own guilt, recorded by the room, amplified by the static, and played back at him. The hospital had kept its archive. He scrambled to his feet, knocking the chair over. He had to get out. He backed toward the door, his eyes locked on the churning, accusing screen. He fumbled for the handle, ripped the door open, and fell into the hallway. The ding of the elevator arriving at the end of the corridor was his salvation. He ran, his footsteps echoing in the blue-lit silence. The knocking and the static seemed to fade, consumed by the antiseptic hum of the ward. The elevator doors were open, waiting. He lunged inside, jabbing the G button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut with a pneumatic sigh, encasing him once more in the blue-panelled box. Silence. Blessed, absolute silence. He collapsed against the rear wall, his heart hammering against his ribs like a fist. He was shaking, drenched in a cold sweat. He focused on his breathing, dragging air into his lungs. Inhale, hold, exhale, the rhythm of a man trying to regain control. He closed his eyes. Inhale, hold, exhale. The rhythm was wrong. It wasn't his. He became aware, with a chilling, dawning horror, of the pattern. It wasn't the steady cadence of recovery. His breath was catching, forcing itself into a new sequence. A ragged gasp, a short pause, another sharp intake, a short pause, a final, shuddering breath, a long, dead pause. Thump, thump, thump. His own body was doing it. His breath had matched the 3-knock rhythm. The invitation had been accepted. The red thread, once tied to her, had found a new anchor. The elevator chimed its descent, but he knew, with a certainty that froze his blood, that he was not leaving. The hospital keeps its archives, and he had just become a part of the collection. So, what do you think? Was it just a mechanical glitch, a symptom of a tired mind in a stressful place, or was something truly supernatural present in that elevator? Hospitals are a common nexus for paranormal claims across many cultures. They are sites of intense emotion, transition, and, of course, death. This concentration of raw energy is believed to leave a residue, or to attract spirits who are not yet ready to move on. In much of Asia, liminal spaces, places that are in between, like doorways, stairwells, and elevators, are considered particularly vulnerable to spiritual activity. An elevator stopping on the wrong floor isn't just a malfunction. It's often interpreted as a spirit bound to that location, or a lost soul trying to complete a final, unfinished journey. Has a hospital elevator ever stopped on your floor unasked? Or have you experienced a glitch you couldn't explain? Tell your story in the comments below. We explore new Hmong ghost stories and dark legends every single week. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.